Drafting Archetypes is brought to you by Game Grid Lehigh. Game Grid Lehigh is an amazing place to buy and sell Magic the Gathering singles. Whether you're building a new cube or crafting your new constructed deck, Game Grid Lehigh is the place to do it. Got a draft coming up with some friends? Buy some seal product here and get it quick. So click the referral link in the description to help out the show, and don't forget to use the code DRAFTPRO10 to get 10% off on your next order at gglehigh.com.
Hi everyone, this is Sam Black with Drafting Archetypes, and this week we're going to be discussing Black-Green X Recursion in Dominaria United. For anyone who is a limited guru or above level patron of Drafting Archetypes at patreon.com/draftingarchetypes, the notes for this podcast are live and available there, so you can pull those up and follow along if you want. And let's get into it. Often I start by talking about how strong an archetype is in the format according to 17 lands, and I did not do that here. I don't know that, the ways that 17 lands categorizes things, I don't think tells me a lot about how effective the particular strategy that I'm talking about here is. And just in general, I think that this is a set that is very high complexity, very high synergy in a way that minimizes the utility of a lot of kinds of data that I regularly use on 17 lands. That's not to say that there's not a lot of useful information there, but some of the stuff I'm going to rely more on my theory and experience than the numbers there. That is to say, I'm not really making any claims about how much better or worse this archetype is than other archetypes. What I want to focus on is just when and how to exist in this space, what you're looking for and what you're trying to make the deck do, and why, and which cards this uses well. So basically there are a lot of cards in this format that put cards into your graveyard and or get cards out of your graveyard, generally in a way that is profitable on those exchanges. And so the more you do those things, the further ahead you get. So this deck is really about kind of grinding and generating card advantage. And it's important to understand that. And it's also important to understand that a lot of other decks aren't about that. And the fact that you are better at that than someone else doesn't matter unless that's what the game is about. And a lot of your opponents, most of them, should be trying to make the game about something else. So you need to be able to make sure that the game is about what you want it to be about. So your opponent is often going to be trying to make the game about your inability to answer their flyers, or their ability to go wide around you with tokens and play a pump spell to kill you, or their ability to finish you off with big creatures and trample and combat tricks if they're red-green, and your inability to have enough life total and or removal to stop them from killing you. And any amount of, but I could have gotten 5 more creatures out of my graveyard and my opponent was never going to be able to keep all of my creatures dead, doesn't matter if you're dead. So you don't want to succeed at making the game about the thing that you're about, which in this context is usually going to be attrition, and then lose anyway because your opponent out-attritions you. So you want to make sure that that you're strong when you make the game about the thing that you want it to be about. But you also need to make sure that you have plans to stop your opponent from dictating the narrative of the game. One thing that this deck does naturally pretty well is gain life. The incidental life gain on Urborg Repossession is a big part of that, but you also have some of it with Gibbering Barricade, and there are various other cards, Mossbeard Ancient and stuff, that can help you gain some life. Tolarian Geyser sometimes makes an appearance. That helps you a little bit against kind of generically everyone who's trying to go under you or around you or over you or through you or whatever. But you also It's easy to get some random like bodies that gum up the ground that help make it harder for your opponent to go wide. You really want some reach creatures to stop your opponent from going over you. Some nice efficient removal, especially instant speed to like answer big creatures and combat tricks. So you need your deck to be kind of well-rounded and not like totally all in on just I mill myself, I get stuff out of the graveyard, rinse and repeat. In particular, one of the big things that I think you really need is just like 1 or 2 reach creatures. There's a huge difference between having a little bit of something somewhere in your deck and not having it, because this deck can use each of the cards that it has a lot. So like if you have 1 reach creature, it's not like your opponent just kills it and then you don't have a reach creature. If you have a reach creature, your opponent kills it, and then you get it back and play it again, and you're still set up to have a reach creature. I think that good common reach creatures that you're looking for are Magnagoth Sentry and Miero's Outrider. You usually want to make sure that you have like a couple of those. I'm at the point now where if I didn't have either of those, I might actually consider playing a Snare Spinner, the 2-mana 1/3 reach spider that gets 2 extra power when it blocks a flyer. I just think like a creature that you can get back that can trade with flyers to cut off that angle from your opponent is important. This deck, this archetype, really revolves around Urborg Repossession for me. Urborg Repossession is probably the like 2nd highest black common in my pick order. I take Extinguish and then Repossession, and I want to have a lot of repossessions. There are a lot of cards historically that are very, very good at generating card advantage by returning creatures from your graveyard to your hand. Like, it doesn't cost a lot of additional mana in general to return additional things from your graveyard to your hand. And the limiting factor on those cards is less, are they good at doing that? And more, are you good at generating a game where that's actually helpful? Because a lot of opponents aren't necessarily putting a lot of effort into getting your creatures into your graveyard for you, especially if it's obvious that your deck wants them there. And so it's easy for Urborg Repossession to just not do anything if like your opponent's just casting flying creatures or making tokens and then planning to play a charge or something. And so it's important for you to have things that make sure that you have creatures in your graveyard. There are a lot of ways to do that, but like if you're going to play more than 1 repossession, you really want to make sure that you have things that make sure that your repossessions are alive. Some examples of good ways to do that are like Benelish Sleeper that you can kick. That's the 3/1 that makes both players sacrifice a creature if you kicked it. So you can just play that, make your opponent sacrifice a creature, you sacrifice it or something else, and then it's a creature that you can repossession. Or Eerie Soul Tender is really, really, really good for this because of the mill 3. And Soul Tender plus Repossession does a nice thing where Soul Tender is very likely to mill a land. Sometimes it mills a land of a color that you need. And then if you kick Repossession, you can return a creature and a permanent, and that includes the lands. So that can kind of like boost up your access to colors or mana if you're just like looking to like it's nice to have the ability to draw land when you want to, basically, and Soul Tender is a good way to make that happen. Another good way to make that happen is with Floriferous Vinewall, especially if you have ways to sacrifice or just chump block with that. Then if what you're looking for is more lands, it's very easy to repossession it back and play it again. Shadow Prophecy, the instant that looks at cards equal to domain, you keep 2 of them in your hand and put the rest in your graveyard, is another good way to enable your graveyard for repossession. You can also kick the uncommon that mills you for 4 if you kick it. Anything that makes your own creatures end up in your graveyard. Gibbering Barricade's another way to do that. You want some reasonable amount of that stuff in total to make sure that your repossessions are on when your opponent's not trying to kill your creatures. Eerie Soul Tender is very, very good in this archetype because it enables your repossessions, but also the more of them you have, the better they get, because them milling each other is good. And if you have multiples of them, they start enabling Writhing Necromass, which is the 7 mana 5/5 Death Touch creature that costs less for each creature in your graveyard. And that ends up being really good in this deck because all of your recursion stuff, especially using Eerie Soul Tender, is very mana intensive. So having a big high impact creature that you can play for very little mana helps you not fall too far behind while you're spending mana getting these cards out of your graveyard. Speaking of this concept of a high impact creature, I think that's the most important thing to understand about what's going on here is your deck is about consistently having access to your best creatures, and whatever your best creature is the thing that you are most commonly casting again and trying to keep in play. And so your deck very much is directly related to the strength of your best creature. So if you have some kind of really, really strong bomb, like, for example, I had this once with Shieldred, and then I could just play Shieldred, and because I had a lot of ways to get Shieldred back, I could just attack. And if my opponent wanted to like block it with view creatures and trade, I was like, great, you've dealt with my Shieldred. You're probably really happy about that, except it's back. And the ability to be really aggressive with Shieldred is really, really strong because it's already putting so much pressure on your opponent with, in case, for people who don't know this mythic rare, it's 2 and 2 black for a 4/5 Death Touch. Whenever your opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. Whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life. So the 2 life per turn that they're losing puts their life total under a lot of pressure. And then if you can also safely attack with your 4/5 Death Touch for 4, which isn't very hard, then your opponent ends up just like losing life way, way, way too quickly. So if you have some kind of Shieldred's one of the best cards in the set, like top 3. If you have such a bomb, then drafting a lot of ways to make sure that you continue to have that bomb in play is going to really, really magnify the strength of that bomb. And on the other hand, if you don't have something like that, and all you're doing is getting back a Magnagoth Sentry or something, 4/4 reach for 4, then it might be that you end up just like chumping or trading or something with that and kind of wheel spinning and falling behind your opponent doing something more powerful. So you really, really want to pay attention to making sure that, like, anytime there is a creature that you have access to that is more impactful than your most impactful creature, there's a very good chance that you want to take that card that elevates the most important or the like highest impact thing that you're doing one level higher. Yeah, at common, like Mira's Outrider and Writhing Necromass are about as high impact as you can get. At uncommon, you're looking at cards like Tatiova and Mossbeard Ancient and Bone Rattle, the 4/4 for 6 that gets something back from your graveyard, is weird here, where it's very, very impactful if it's getting something else very, very impactful back. Morrow is another one that can be very high impact. It'll usually be an 8/8 or a 10/10, Territorial Morrow. But having no keywords, it can end up not lining up well against, an opponent with, like, if your opponent has a Death Touch creature, it's not that big of a deal. You can trade and get it back. But if your opponent's like very wide, you might have trouble like actually getting through with it. And of course, Wingmantle Chaplain is the actual best uncommon and best thing that you can have going on in this deck. When you have Wingmantle Chaplain, you do want to be in this kind of space. This is where this archetype has a lot of overlap with my discussion of the Defender's deck in the last episode. But this is more about when you don't have Chaplain, which puts you in easy mode, what else you can do. A wide range of high impact rare and mythic rare cards exist. You're obviously like, it's not just about like what's the win rate of this card, but how impactful it is, which is to say that like the more expensive, higher impact cards are more relevantly advantageous for this archetype than, like a really good efficient 2-drop. I touched briefly on Floriferous Vinewall as like nice to be able to like chump block with and then get back. because it draws a card, but it doesn't merely draw a card. It draws a specific predictable kind of card, which means that it's particularly good to be able to like rebuy because you know what it's going to give you and you can go to that if that's what you want. Also, it's worth noting that this deck often will have some very expensive cards, but also play a lot of Flurfur's Vine Walls, and it's not terribly unusual to play like 15 or 16 lands because your Flurfur's Vine Wall will help you find more lands. You want to make sure Flurfur's Vine Wall as mana fixing is interesting in that it is very, very good at it, but only if you have enough sources of the color that you're looking for. Like, it doesn't actually search your library for missing color. So if you have one land that taps for blue mana, it's not going to find it very well. But if you have, 3 or 4, it's very good at digging you to your first, like, blue or whatever. When you're trimming lands for Flurfur's Vine Walls, you have to be very careful about not like counting your Flurfur's Vine Wall as a blue source while playing only one blue land, but you can kind of count it as a source for anything that you have like 4 or 5 lands that tap for. And that often leads to a spot where if your mana base is very Flurfur's Vine Wall heavy, you want to kind of balance your colored sources more than you otherwise would. So you might kind of cheat on like not playing as many lands of your secondary color so that you can play additional lands of your tertiary color, but count on Vine Wall usually finding your secondary color if you're missing it. Removal. You want some of it. Instant speed is better than not instant speed, as always. Hard removal, like removal that can kill anything, is nice. Like efficient is kind of less important, the same way that like efficient is less important in creatures, it's also less efficient in removal. You really just need it to do whatever you need it to do. That said, if your whole deck is too clunky, this is definitely a format where you can get run over. So you do also want some cheap removal to help kind of stop your opponent from doing that, turn the corner. I want to highlight Destroy Evil in particular. This is a card that it's really easy to sleep on. It looks like it might be a sideboard card. It's good in some form. It's the kind of card that's good in some formats and bad in others. I and a lot of other people kind of started by not really seeing it as a great card or maybe being skeptical about playing a lot of copies of it. It has very, very good stats on 17 lands, like better than Lightning Strike good. And I've started to try playing with it, and it has radically exceeded my expectations. There are a lot of big creatures. The big creatures are very important. There are also a lot of pump spells, like the red-green aggro deck usually plays like a lot of tricks, and even if they have a small creature, once they play a trick on it, then Destroy Evil kills it, and you get a 2-for-1. And in addition to that, there are very, very, very few ways to exile creatures in this set, except with enchantments. And there are a bunch of different Oblivion Ring type cards that exile your creatures. And exiling your creatures is the thing that shuts down your ability to make sure that they're in play when you're recurring them. So having Destroy Evil to answer the Oblivion Ring type effects lets you make sure that your plan of always have your best creature stays online, while also giving you an efficient removal spell for big creatures. Really highly recommend prioritizing and playing multiple Destroy Evils in this archetype, but also most white decks. Like, I think that Destroy Evil is roughly as good as Extinguish the Light, and those two are the best common removal spells. So, it's kind of been implied in all of my discussion about cards that are not black or green and how mana works. This deck is very, very rarely straight black-green. You should expect to splash, maybe even splash every color. You want to be careful to avoid cards that cost 2 of the same color where possible. Make an exception usually for one color, usually black for like Extinguish the Light, maybe Choke Miasma or something. You can do that and play expensive cards that cost green, like Mossbeard Ancient, and Tatiova counts because it's good late. But you want to be really, really careful about even good cards that cost 2 colored mana of the same color that's not necessarily one of your primary colors. Like Talus Lookout is a really, really good card for this deck. It can kind of fill the role of the reach creatures. And if it's like dying and coming back and finding your other stuff, that's all very strong. But blue can be pretty hard to pull off in this deck. So you want to be cautious about including cards like that. Really pay attention to what your mana is going to look like, what kind of fixing you have, how many non-basics you have, and like whether you can realistically play it without stretching your mana too far before taking and trying to play a card like that. Another off-color card that I want to call special attention to is Micromancer, the 3 and a blue 3/3 that can search your library for a 1 mana instant or sorcery and put it into your hand. Just finding Urborg Repossession is awesome because it means that when your Micromancer trades off, you can get it and something back and then get another thing, which could be another repossession, and you can just kind of keep that going. Or it's also easy to build a larger kind of suite of options for your Micromancer, especially if you're playing every color. You want to have, multiple repossessions ideally for your Micromancer to find, but then it's also good to have some 1 mana removal. There are a lot of options here. Tail Swipe, Cut Down, Runic Shot, Bone Splinters, Flowstone Infusion, Rona's Vortex. If you're not sure what any of those are offhand, don't worry about it. The point is they're things that answer your opponent's creatures in one way or another and cost a single mana. So you have a ton of options for cards that Micromancer can find that give you a removal spell toolbox in addition to kind of this like raw grindy card advantage engine from taking Urborg Repossession. So really strong card to include. You can have a nice little toolbox package there. The big thing that I've come to realize, I've drafted this archetype a lot. I've had some versions of it that were very good, some versions of it that were very bad. A lot of that I think does come down to just, well, what was my best creature? Because the thing that the deck does is play that best creature. And so I have certainly lost to, I didn't have a busted uncommon or rare, and none of this stuff mattered. I think this archetype is strong, but it certainly has fail states, and there are a lot of different pieces that have to come together in the right way. And you kind of end up on this path before you know that you're going to check all those boxes and have all the pieces come together. And when I was like drafting this and thinking about it, I realized that what it really reminds me of is drafting the Stream of Thought control deck that I drafted in Modern Horizons 1. This was a deck that was usually close to creatureless, usually 5 colors, and based on recurring, running through my deck multiple times and having answers to everything. And while I was drafting it, there were always all of these different boxes that I was trying to check. Like, does my mana work? Do I have answers to like a huge creature? Do I have answers to people going wide? It was always really fun for me to like be evaluating every card, both in the context of like, well, how strong is this card? And also like, what does my deck need right now? Does this fill a hole? Or do I have like enough of that and I can prioritize like a weaker card that does a thing that like the rest of my deck isn't doing yet? And really thinking of your whole deck as a cohesive package. And I get very, very similar vibes in this archetype, where I have this kind of like a checklist of like, do I have a good creature? Do I have a way to get it back? Do I have enough enablers for all of my recursion? Do I have removal? Do I have a reach creature or a good flyer? Does my mana work? In addition to all of the normal, do I have a curve type questions that you should always be asking. I think you really need to focus on thinking about your deck holistically and thinking about both its plan and what its fail state's going to be and anticipating that and seeing if you can find a thing to address that and to like plug that hole. Complicated deck to draft, very, very fun in my opinion and to my taste, both to draft and play games with. You end up with a lot of options, a lot of ways to spend your mana. I've had frustrations in this format with a lot of my attempts to draft aggro decks where I felt like I was really at the mercy of not having a lot of card selection and needing to get like my creatures and tricks in the right combination and in the right order. And this archetype feels a little bit less dependent on the order of your deck and more important on your ability to get all of the pieces in your deck, and kind of puts more of the emphasis, I guess, on the draft portion in a way that I personally enjoy. So if all of that sounds like an appealing puzzle to you, I recommend giving this archetype a shot. That's what I have to say about it. It's time to turn this over to Twitch chat for questions. If you have any questions about this archetype, if I haven't addressed them, please bring them up in chat, regardless of whether you've already asked. Ask again so that I know that it's still outstanding. While I'm waiting for those questions, I want to thank my first new patron in a while since we started doing this again regularly. Matt, thanks for the support. Anyone else who's interested in joining the Patreon, potentially supporting the podcast, getting perks and all that, check out patreon.com/draftingarchetypes. Really appreciate any support. I'm back to doing content full time, so it's really important to me. All right, first question. Which, if any, non-bomb cards are sending me toward this archetype early in the draft? Anytime I'm in black broadly, I think that I'm likely to be trying to get into this space. So, and I take Urborg Repossession pretty highly. So Urborg Repossession itself is likely to put me in this direction, but even an Extinguished Light or a Gibbering Barricade or something is also going to put me in this direction. So I was thinking about this format a little bit, just in general, and about how a lot of the people that I follow on Twitter always seem to tweet decks that look pretty similar. And I think that a lot of my decks also look pretty similar to each other. And I think that this format, I was thinking of it as kind of functioning like a personality test or something, because all of the card evaluations are so contextual. It's less this card is better than this card and more this card is better in this archetype than this card. I think it really leads to kind of self-reinforcing spirals and really exacerbating the problem of Magic being about finding a local maxima. I think it's really easy for people to just get into a rut in this format, basically, where they're like, oh, this card is performing well, so I'm going to take it highly, but it only performs well in this particular deck. And so because I'm taking this card highly, I'm going to take it more highly than other people because it's pretty mediocre if you're not regularly in this deck. And then the fact that I have it is going to pull me into always being in this place again. So for a lot of people, that might be like, I take Tolarian Terror very highly, and then whenever I have it, I start taking all of the blue and red spell stuff that enables it or whatever. So for me, it takes very, very little to get me into this archetype, because this is kind of just the spot that I've found myself in, and a lot of my pick order is about understanding which cards are good here and why and how to support that, where I've kind of struggled a little bit with figuring out which cards I'm supposed to be taking first to get into the aggressive decks or something like that. There might be other people who are into the red-green combo space who are going to take the double strike uncommon trick or Gaia's Might highly and take that as a signal, whereas I'm not going to take either of those unless I'm already in that deck, and I'm not gonna already be in that deck because none of the on-roads to that deck really stand out to me. While there are some cards that are just so clearly powerful in a certain archetype that they strongly signal to me, oh, draft this, I think left to choosing among commons, it's really just going to be about what a person is kind of drawn to. And I have been discussing the stuff that I'm most naturally drawn to because it's the stuff that I have the best understanding and most experience with. Best understanding of and most experience with. Any red cards you seem more likely to include? Niara's Outrider is the big one that's going to get me to include red because I'm really looking for the reach creature and the value on casting that means that anytime it trades off, I get to hit my opponent again, and then that gives me a way to know that I have a real way to end the game. I would also be reasonably happy to play like Flowstone, Infusion, and Lightning Strike, but those are often taken more highly than I want to take them because I'm usually not playing that much red mana, because it's really just like Outrider, which is a 5 mana single pip card that I'm looking to play after I already have my other colors of mana lined up. So red is usually my lightest color, but there are red cards that I'm happy to include. Also, the red card that does damage based on cards in hand and kicks for blue to draw a card is another good one to splash. And sometimes if I have good sack outlets, I'll include the threat that you can kick to sacrifice to be its own sack outlet. What would you estimate the ratio of green black versus green black X versus green black XY versus 5 color is the best seat available? I think that it's very, very rare that you're supposed to be straight green black. I don't differentiate a lot between like 3, 4, and 5 colors once I'm green black. I would say I tend to try to gravitate toward 4 color. The 5th is often a bit taxing on my mana, but it's like worth it, usually specifically because of Outrider. Sometimes you just need to be very careful about making sure that you're only doing it when you're actually getting duels and like reasonably easily. 3 versus like 3 in 1 splash, or 2 in 1 splash, or 3 in 1 splash, or 2 in a like the 3 versus 4 color feels very similar to me, as long as you're careful to like keep the splashes light. Can Defender be part of this archetype? Yes, absolutely. I'm usually playing Floriferous Vinewall and Gibbering Barricade anyway. So if I have Wingmantle Chaplain, I'll include it and the tutors for it, and my deck will be much, 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 much better than if I don't have that. If I don't have Wingmantle Chaplain, I don't really like playing defenders outside of Floriferous Vinewall and Gibbering Barricade, though I will note that if you're slightly spell heavy, the 05 that loots is pretty nice. Specifically, I like discarding Eerie Soul Tender to it, because sometimes you go through your library so much that the mill 3 is kind of dangerous, especially like if you're worried about it milling specific cards that you really want to be able to draw that aren't creatures. So being able to just discard it to get the graveyard ability without needing to cast it is sometimes something that you're looking for, and the 05 mill wall can help there. Next up, do you ever have issues with self-mill in long games with this deck? And if so, how do you play around that? Yes. I have won a good number of games in this format with 0 to 3 cards left in my deck. Most of the time, the way that I deal with it is by prioritizing high impact stuff. I can get to the point where once I have access to every card in my deck, I can end the game very, very quickly. But it is possible to lose to milling out if you have too much of this stuff. It has been a concern. Sometimes I have to not cast Shadow Prophecy because I don't have enough cards left in my library or whatever. I don't think I've been at the point where I've played extra cards to deal with it, but I could see doing that at some point if I had too many Shadow Prophecies and Eerie Soul Tenders or something, and they seemed very good in my deck. Next up, thinking about how this deck draws or takes cards out of your deck, and your deck could go to a really low number. How important is the deck manipulation and tracking your deck? Pretty important. I played some games yesterday where I had a lot of Floriferous Vinewalls and was recurring them, and at one point I put a Mossbeard Ancient on the bottom of my deck. My opponent Rona's Vortexed a Mossbeard Ancient at the bottom of my deck. So I knew exactly where it was, and I really wanted to draw it again. So I started like aggressively casting and recurring Floriferous Vinewalls to filter cards under the Mossbeard Ancient to draw back through my entire deck to get the Mossbeard Ancient again. And that actually worked. I did cast the Mossbeard Ancient again, not very many turns later. Especially if you're blue enough that you're playing Impulse, that kind of stuff can come up. As to like how much it comes up, it really depends on how many like Impulses and Floriferous Vinewalls you're playing and whether you're paying attention to that stuff, but it is real. How have your games been in this archetype against white token decks? Can they go wide to get around your blockers? Yeah, they can go wide to get around your blockers. The wall package, like Floriferous Vinewall, is not a good blocker, but it is actually pretty nice against like the 2/2 that makes it 1/1 Cavalier, because you can block the 1/1 pretty easily. Of course, they can like enlist uh, in that spot, but if you have like a 2/4, like Gibbering Barricade, then you've kind of handled both of those, and it just gets harder for 1/1s to get around you if you have some Floriferous Vine Walls. And then the Shield Wall Sentinel, the 1/3 that finds another wall. Once you start like getting those in play, it gets harder and harder for the like token deck to get around you. If you don't have the wall package, you want to make sure that you're getting random bodies into play is kind of the best thing that you can do about dealing with the token decks. So like Phyrexian Ragers, it's really good if it's a 2 toughness body rather than a 1 toughness body, but it's, also okay to trade 1 toughness bodies here and get them back. The incidental life gain is really important. Having a Choking Miasma is something that I'm pretty happy with in these decks, even though that card doesn't have great stats. Mostly, I think those decks usually need to get some early damage in, or it's hard for them to go wide enough that a single charge kills you. So if you can prioritize, getting some good early blockers, again, Barricade goes a long way there, or some token makers of your own. It's okay to play, Warhorse or something. Can help with that. I mean, I mentioned it's definitely possible to lose to any of the different ways that people have of attacking in this format. Going wide is something to watch out for. But there are tools, especially with just making sure that you have some of those, if you spend turn 3 playing a Phyrexian Rager instead of a Shadow Prophecy, you're way more likely to not, get run over by a token deck. How highly do you value Shadow Prophecy in this deck? I saw yesterday you were playing 3 copies, which seemed like a lot more straight card draw than is common in recent limited formats. I like Shadow Prophecy, especially if you're a lot of colors. It can really help with fixing your mana, especially if you have really good bombs, because it sees so many cards. It can help find them. Good for enabling repossession. Good for free milling Eerie Soul Tenders, and it also pairs well if you're playing a card like Essence Scatter or something, where you have a bit of a instant speed game plan. If I have Essence Scatter in my deck, I prefer Shadow Prophecy to the Divination with Kicker, Phyrexian something, so that I can hold up Essence Scatter and then play the card draw. You want to make sure that you have some ways to gain life. And it's certainly you don't want too much card draw if your deck doesn't naturally give you time to play it well. You need to make sure that it fits coherently into what you're doing, but it's a strong card. How highly are you prioritizing lands for this archetype during draft? Very highly. If you're planning to play a lot of colors, you need to prioritize lands. Notably, I'm taking Floriferous Vine Walls over duels most of the time, but basically, I mentioned that checklist of things I want to make sure that that my bases are covered, and having functional mana is part of that checklist, and so there's not a static answer to, well, do you take a dual land or do you take Magnagoth Sentry? It's if my mana is pretty good and I don't have a reach creature, I'll take Magnagoth Sentry. If I already have 2 Outriders, but my mana is a little bit dicey, I'll take the land. And you should not draft in a way where, you always take land over X or whatever. How highly do you value dual lands? / how splashy do you get? Do you end up 5 colors frequently because of the domain? So I often end up with some way to use 4 or 5 colors. Often it's there's this, I can kick the red thing that does damage and kicks to draw a card, or I can kick a Tolarian Geyser, but I don't need the mana for that kicker color, and I have 1 or 2 duels of that type. The how highly do you value them and how much do you splash, I think is something that you want to kind of get a read on the table about. Some tables, the lands go really highly and you need to recognize that and be more conservative. And some tables, the lands go late and you don't need to spend high picks on them and you'll have plenty and you can prioritize domain stuff and splash more. I think that it doesn't structurally matter to me that much, like whether I have a bunch of lands and I'm splashing or not. It's just about, if the table's prioritizing lands, then they're more likely to pass you the other non-lands that you need to accomplish your goals without splashing. Whereas if they're prioritizing spells and giving you lands, then you might need to like look harder to find the spells that you need, but the lands let you take them when they're in other colors. So I would say it goes back to just like making sure that you have a plan and making sure that you have all your bases covered and kind of paying attention to that checklist about stuff that you need to make sure that your deck has covered. And you can be pretty flexible about where you're at with your relationship with colors in that draft based on the texture of the table. Is there an ideal creature count to aim for in this kind of deck? Kind of radically no. There are some builds of it that want to be really, really creature dense, specifically likely because you're trying to use Writhing Necromancer or something. But you can also have like a lot of spells and things that care about spells. Like I've had some builds where like Wrath or Vohar, whatever the like blue-black looter guy is, are good. Again, it's like, well, do you mostly like, is your card advantage divination type cards, or is it Phyrexian Rager type cards? And are you dealing with flyers with Extinguish the Light or with Magnagoth Sentry? And you can kind of go either way, and it doesn't necessarily matter all that much which one you're doing. So I would say no. No, there's not an ideal creature count. Are there secondary archetypes in Dominaria United that complement this strategy aside from bombs and defenders? Is there a strategy that's a good complement or something to veer off? So yes, there are a lot. Like, I think that this can kind of pair with like the black red, like kind of wide, kind of sacrifice stuff. It can pair with like I've had some like token heavy versions of this where I'm making good use of like the Scout the Wilderness or whatever, the green thing that searches for land and kicks to get to 1/1 white creatures. And then sometimes I'm just sacrificing those tokens to Gibbering Barricade, or they're helping me block, but sometimes maybe I would have like Czar or Wrath or some kind of like legend that's using those tokens well. Yeah, and I mean, I think that there are even like dedicated Gaia's Might type plans that could be incorporated into this. And I mentioned like, sometimes you're in like a Writhing Necromancer package, sometimes you're not. Like the whole self-mill thing is itself kind of a secondary archetype that is sometimes in this and sometimes not. Good matchups and bad matchups for this archetype. I think the best matchup is like other like mid-range decks that are weaker than you. And the bad matchups are like aggro decks that draw really well. The worst matchup, I guess, is like other mid-range decks that have way better bombs than you do. I don't know. I don't know that I think that the format has felt to me like it comes down really well to like good and bad matchups more than like good and bad draws, but that's because I still kind of feel at the moment like so many of the aggro decks feel so much at the mercy of like the draws. What recursion do you look for besides Urborg Repossession? Eerie Soul Tender, the 4/4 Bone Rattle uncommon, the 2/3 lifelink that kicks to return a creature, the Missionary. Those ones are all really, really, really good. The uncommons, of course, better than Soul Tender. The uncommon saga that has like Raised Dead, the 3-mana black saga, Braid's Frightful Return is, okay. I think it's like worse than Processing, and so I often end up not playing it. But it does some cute stuff where like it's not very hard to have a creature you want to sacrifice or whatever, and drawing another card off of it's nice. It's just I think it's a little bit weaker than Processing overall. But worth noting that, sorry, not Processing, Urborg Repossession. Worth noting that Urborg Repossession plays really well with sagas in general, since it can get them back. I think that's most of the other recursion that I play. I guess, if things go really well, the mythic 4-mana angel that lets you play things from your graveyard is probably pretty good. Should you build a 45 to 50 card deck instead when self-milling? Most of the time, no. You should just have high enough impact cards that you can win when you get them back and cast them the first time. Green-black domain recursion, the ideal 41 card deck. 41 in particular is pretty unlikely. Like, if I'm trying to play more cards, I don't know why I would play exactly one more card. How much tapped land is considered too much for this deck? My most common problem with this has been getting run over by an aggro deck. So, I don't have a number of tap lands that I think are too many. I mostly, if I'm playing a lot of colors, just try to have a lot of them, and I would rather deal with the fact that I have tapped lands by prioritizing cheap removal rather than by cutting tapped lands. So I don't really have a thought on what the most is. I've been pretty happy playing whatever I can get, basically always. How many tap lands is too many? If you have 7 to 8 tap lands, do you consider going up a land? No, I very much would not increase my number of lands because of having tapped lands. If anything, I would decrease my number of lands because I had my colors covered better. I understand where you're getting at in terms of but you need this many untapped lands so that you can play an untapped land when you want to. But I think the version of that that's more real is getting to a point where you take the Scry, the Grotto, over a tapped land during the draft. Another question about, do you think this deck needs 18 lands instead of 17? Because your deck tends to have a lot of expensive cards. My experience has been that my deck has a lot of card advantage and things that find lands, and I've felt like I can never play as few lands as I want to make my colors work and make sure I hit my first few. I'm way more likely to think about going to 16 lands than 18 in these decks. All right, I kind of like this question. It's a little bit off topic. Are there any steps you can recommend to not always drafting similar decks in this format? I mentioned that this format really leads to getting into, kind of a local maxima or a rut where you figure out how to draft a thing and then just keep drafting it. So is there anything that I can recommend to avoid that? I think the best thing is track your stats, track your drafts, look at what your most drafted cards are, and look at your least drafted cards, and pay attention to cards that have high win rates that you don't play very much. Also pay attention to content creators and look for people who draft decks that are very different than what you draft, and try to figure out watch their drafts, figure out what they're taking that puts them in that direction, figure out which cards win a lot, and try just if you see a card that wins a lot that you don't usually play in a pack, take it and see where it goes, and just, try to find ways to put yourself into a different space than you usually are in your drafts. Another slightly off topic, unrelated to this episode in particular, what are some general tips to more consistency with your draft decks? This is from a new player. I think the big ones are, in this format, try to make sure that you have at least 8 lands that tap for anything that you would consider a primary color, and try to make sure that you have a reasonable curve. I understand that without the idea of a reasonable curve might not be self-evident. I would say try to make sure that you have at least 6 as a bare minimum cards that cost less than 3 mana. Make sure that you don't have cards that cost 2 mana of the same, 2 pips of the same color of mana, like something that costs blue, for example, unless you have, let's say, 7 ways to get mana of that color, unless it's very, very expensive and very, very strong. These are rough guidelines. There will be times when you want to break any guideline. Generally play 17 lands. How many is too many Flurfurous Vine Walls? I played 5. Should I cut 1 land for every 2 Vine Walls? I have not found too many Flurfurous Vine Walls. 5 is around where I would start to wonder about it, and where I would consider trimming them depending on how well I'm using them. Like, if I have wall payoffs or gibbering barricade to sacrifice them, or even Warhost's Frenzy at that point can be relevant to just like block with a bunch of them and kill attackers and draw cards. But if you're not doing anything with them, I would consider trimming some at that point. Because you're not going to be able to cut enough lands to avoid flooding, again, depending on how well you use mana. But you need to make sure that you both, the thing that I mentioned about how Flare First Vine Wall like doesn't really count as fixing if you're looking for a color that you have only like one land that taps for that color. So you need to make sure that you have enough green to cast your Vine Walls and like, 3 or 4 lands that tap for whatever color you're trying to find with them. It's hard to go to like 13 or 14 lands because of Vine Walls, but it's pretty realistic to go to like 15 lands and play a bunch of Vine Walls. But at that point, it's like, well, is the 5th Vine Wall better than being like 15 lands and 4 Vine Walls? I'm not sure. I haven't had the privilege of playing with 5 Vine Walls yet, to be sure. Are there cases where you play more than 40 cards? If you are going to have access to more than 40 cards in a game. So if you are going to draw every card in your deck or otherwise see every card in your deck, then it is defensible to play more than 40. Seeing every card in your deck is rarely a good enough reason to play more than 40. It would only be if you're going to see every card in your deck and there's some kind of like card that's contributing something unique and valuable that you wouldn't be able to play if you only had 40. And often there's something else that you can and should cut instead. More likely if you are milling so much that you plan to mill your entire deck. Are there signals to watch out for to avoid green-black? The problem here is that I don't know how you would find them in time. I would like to learn how to tell when it's not going to work, but I don't know yet. Because you need all these different things, and it's easy to kind of like start going through the list and taking things that are covering some of your bases and feeling like it's going reasonably well. And then halfway through the draft, you start to panic about like, oh wait, my deck has this problem. And then you never solve that problem and then your deck's bad. Like, an easy way for that to happen is if you just start out with like some good removal and recursion and card advantage, and you never find a creature that matters. And I don't know how to make sure that that never happens with decks like this that have to have all this different stuff. I feel like sometimes you just have to go along for the ride and hope it comes together, and maybe get better at like finding more ways to make do. Like, kind of like how I was mentioning, I haven't personally played Snare Spinner, but now that I've lost because I didn't have a Magnagoth Sentry or Outrider, maybe at some point I will take and play Snare Spinner. So there's some amount of that, some amount of like learning where you can take something that you otherwise wouldn't to solve a problem with your deck. But that doesn't tell you when to not draft it. That just tells you how to deal with like, oh, whoops, maybe I shouldn't have been doing this and I am anyway. But I kind of think that's more important. I think that like it really is hard to get a read on, oh, I shouldn't be here in time. And it's more important to know how to handle, I shouldn't be here, but I am. So I think that's where I would focus. Do you ever play Sheldred's Restoration, or is it too expensive? I have never played it. It reads to me as too expensive. I can imagine playing it if I was like really short on ways to get things back and had something like a Wingmantle Chaplain, but it's never come to that. I'm gonna wrap this up here. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in and for all the questions. I will be back 1 week from now for the next episode, and I will decide in a few days whether I feel comfortable enough with the format as a whole to start putting up the poll about what I'll cover next, or whether I feel like I've been trapped in a rut too much and need to talk about something in particular. That's where I'm at. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.